Welcome to the PIDE webinar series. I am your host, Shahid Mahmood, Research Fellow at PIDE. PIDE is a leading public sector think tank and organization that has been, since the last few years, has been bringing to all of you webinars on topics of importance from a socio-economic point of view and from a socio-economic milieu. Today's topic is no different. In fact, it's a very important topic. It's about cities. Cities world over are known as engines of growth. And there is whatever humanity, if you look at the historic record, all the creativity, all those enhancers of growth that I should say, perhaps that's the best way to name them, that those enhancers of growth, creativity, and output and everything related to economic growth, that has come from cities. So cities are very important for the economy and economic growth. So it's a very important topic. But in Pakistan, as you would be well aware, cities are not in that great shape. In fact, some of them we know for sure, and we keep being bombarded with these statistics that some of them are literally gas chambers now, polluted beyond recognition and wavered, and without any organization that you would think that is necessary for running a city efficiently. So one of these topics is how to regenerate cities. And this is one theme that we also touched upon in PIDE's rapid growth strategy. So today we have an expert on this in the form of Mr. Pervez Qureshi, who is a known architect and an urban planner, and who would be giving us his presentation, his lecture upon understanding city regeneration. So Pervez Saab, without further ado, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm Pervez Qureshi. I'm an architect and urban planner. And the background of this particular discussion really goes back some weeks ago, where PIDE had initiated a program for getting proposals from various institutions, individuals, to do work on urban regeneration and urban renewal. And they received about 15 odd proposals. And somehow or the other, after evaluating many of these proposals, lots of them did not really fulfill the evaluation criteria that was established by PIDE. And so the thought really was that perhaps a lot of people didn't quite understand what was required of them. And then perhaps the other issue was they did not quite understand the complexity of the assignment. And maybe at another level, we had been asking people to write up proposals which are on a very, very complex issue. So Dr. Nadeemullah requested me to sort of put together something to be discussed with PIDE and with other participants on what urban regeneration and urban renewal is all about. And so after giving it some thought, I decided to put something together and try to focus on a project that we had undertaken in terms of urban renewal and urban regeneration in Multan, and thought that would be an appropriate way of perhaps illustrating some of the key issues and considerations that really go in terms of development of an understanding of urban regeneration and urban renewal. Now, the key elements of urban renewal programs is a program of land redevelopment often used to address urban decay in cities. And I'm sure a lot of people understand this. And it really involves the clearing out of blighted areas in the inner cities, clear out slums, and create potential opportunities for better housing, business, and other developments. And the primary purpose of urban renewal is to restore economic viability of a given area by attracting external private public investments, encouraging businesses, startup, and sustainability. And towards urban regeneration, the approach is for city planning to repair the social and economic problems of an urban area and improve the physical and environmental aspects of that part of the city, as well as the buildings and the infrastructure in and around it. It means an overall planning and a vision for cities oriented towards potential energy conservation and social inclusivity. And it is also a key element and is designed to bring back underutilized assets and to redistribute opportunities, potentially increasing urban prosperity and improving the quality of life. Now, these are the basic elements, very elementary in its approach, and that some of the issues that need to be addressed in generally, I'm making a very broad-based assessment here, is that we've got to be really clear on the objectives. What is it that one really wants to do? And then have the appropriate documentation for the physical environment, including the infrastructure, water supply, sewage, gas, and of course the physical buildings. Have an idea who the stakeholders are. And this is a very key element of this issue. Then understand businesses, the social issues and the programs, the historical background, and in the context that we were trying to do this work, gender-related issues, economic, and then obviously there's going to be some potential relocation of disrupted people. How do they go? Where do they go? How that is going to be entertained, how that is going to be done and undertaken. And of course, the whole issue of urban services. Now, this is just a brief, and the numbers are very complex, and the interrelationships between them is there. And I'm going to now take you to Multan, and as potentially an illustration of what was done there about 15 odd years ago. And we selected an area to do a fair amount of urban regeneration. The historical background of Multan city, I'm going to run you very quickly through this, where it is located. I'm sure people know where the city is. It's on the confluence, on right adjacent to the Chenab River at the southern part of Punjab. This is an old picture of 1874. It's the historical map of Punjab at that time, and it is an indication of where the city is located. Then we have another historical map of Punjab, and now I'm going to take you into the heart of the city, where you'll find that the areas, this is the fort area, where the cursor is moving, and then this is the older part of the city, and there's a river on one side. So this is the area, and there's an outer wall, which is the facile for the of the walled city. And this is also something which is of dating 1874. Brief history dates back over 1,000 years. Arabs came there about 662. There was a Mughal rule, there's a Sikh rule, there's a British rule, and then of course there's a partition. And then the city at that time, this is a background of where the city came from, how it originated, what happened after the British took over, then in 1947. And then we move on to the city itself. This is again an image of, or a plan out of Multan of a city map dating back in the late 1800s. And if you focus on, this is the area that we'll be looking at in the heart of the city, the walled city, as well as the areas surrounding it. And again, now when we look at it, we see this is the city itself. We have the old city, then we have the fort. And this is the specific area that one is going to be looking at. And this is a map of 1857. And then as we move on, we now have a satellite image of the city, which is a more recent one. And the focus really was, again, the older part of the city here, the city fort. And this is the area primarily that one has been addressing. It's an urban renewal and a cultural preservation of the Multan fort. That was a separate project by itself. It gives you some idea of what the historical background. This is the Multan Killa in 1865. Then there was this very famous Shah Rukh-e Alam you've probably heard of, which is a great monument there. This was restored and eventually got the Aga Khan Award about 15, 20 years ago. And around this area was a complete slum area. And the focus really is on the Qasim Bagh and the Ghantagar area, and it is this circle, and this is the fort, the surrounding wall of the fort. And the real focus was to improve this segment that encompasses a Ghantagar and the gold market. The gold market was famous leather market, and it had and around the fort, around this facility, were a series of slums. So the intention really was to clean up this space, and I'll give you some idea of the Ghantagar Chowk. This is the square, and what was located around it was a beautiful building, which was the Ghantagar itself was done in 1884, and it was a focus of the city at that time. As a city, it was designed as a city hall, and it was right very close to the Killa itself. And it was then, this is the area, the Ghantagar is located here. And this is that gold market or the leather market. And over on these areas are this is the fort. And the thrust was to improve this whole area. And it included a population of about around 40, 50,000 people. And there's confluence of 9 roads, as you can see from this, all coming together at the gold market, which was the leather market. And the intention was to clean this whole area up and improve the visual as well as the cultural elements, clean up the slum spaces. And so now this is another satellite image of where the location of the Ghantagar was. And these are all the encroachments. And this is the Shah Rukh-e Alam tomb, which you see pictures of, and this is the fort. So this is an area that needed to be cleaned up. And as you can see, the number of roads which are coming in, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 roads which is coming into this area. So it was quite a mess. And the initial situation of the site was something like this, where you had the Ghantagar, and then subsequently adjacent areas. You can see how the Ghantagar and its area and surrounding it is dilapidated and in slum areas. Next pictures will give you an idea of some of the leather markets which are surrounding this. These are some pictures of the gold market, other areas right adjacent to it, and then some additional pictures of the traffic congestion, the volume and the quality of buildings that were in and around that area. In some locations, there were about 3-story structures, and a bulk of these were on encroached land. And some additional photographs depicting what the site is all about. And then the proposal really was to the urban renewal and the cultural preservation of the site. And its concept was that it's one of the oldest rich cities of the country, has a lot of cultural heritage, and urbanization had significantly damaged and encroached on some of the key historical buildings. And the area around Ghantagar and Killa Qasim Bagh resulted in traffic congestion and inaccessibility to the fort. The objectives were really some cleanness, removal of leather market, removal of encroachments, traffic flow reorganization, construction of the built heritage, improve access to heritage sites. And this is the superimposed gold market area, the fort, and you can see the Ghantaghar. There is the leather market here, and then this is the fort area. And now the various documentation of this area was done, and various phases were evolved. In phase 1 was the restructuring, demolition, and removal of the gold market. Then there were phases 2, which were clearing up the slum area around the fort. Then there are other phases. There's a phase 3, phase 4, and 5. And what this really entailed was that you're looking at the Gantaghar area, and this is the whole fort area. And this was the area that we are now currently focusing. And this further went on into greater detail, and a brief analysis of this area uh, resulted in a very complex uh, uh, number of people which were involved. There were the stakeholders, and there were stakeholders comprised of residents, which people had ownership rights. There were others who had no documentation of ownership. There were encroachments. There was a trade organization, community organizations, municipal corporation, development authority, ACAF, archaeology department, WAPDA, WASA, traffic issues. An analysis was required on the flow and demands of the immediate vicinity. The confluence of 9 roads, existing conditions were poor, residents were being impacted. Land uses, the gold market was a prime area of wholesale leather market on encroached land, numerous encroachments, residential, commercial, and a very complex set of issues, including environmental conditions, traffic congestion, rising to thick smoke, pollution, signage was poor, uncovered sewer heaps, absence of flora, any space available. Infrastructure was very poor, ill-managed, unfiltered, grid power lines, and the road gradients were such that it was an accumulation where anytime there was a rain, it all came in that one particular location. And the design process, now I'll move on from here to the design process. And one was the documentation of this. The intent really was to document all the physical elements there. And these things that you see is a documentation of the ownership of people who were living there and the number of houses. In the gold market itself, there were about close to 300 people whose ownership needed to be established. And it varied in terms of its size, scale, location, and and the documentation that they had. And this particular area is the Gantaghar, and this is the fort area. So the intention really was to see how we could, as a phase 1, remove this and improve the quality in terms of the traffic congestion as well as the improvement in slums. And so now you see this was now transferred into various phases. Phase 1 was the addressing the gold issue of the gold market, the demolition, and then of course in getting the stakeholders involved. There were a number of mosques there were a number of different people. Relocation was an issue by itself. And then the whole legal process to do this. And I'm talking about now just the pure physical element. The intention really was from the Gantaghar, you should be able to see the fort. And if we could remove this gold market from here, and of course improve the traffic flow and relocate the residents. Then the next step was this here, that from a Gantaghar we have a visual obstructions that could be removed as one of the key elements of the one of the key objectives is the Multan fort here. And the next was then, of course, translating this into a physical plan. And now you can see the confluence of roads here and how what the intention was that once this area is removed, you will have we can do a roundabout or various other things here. And this is one of the options that was prepared in terms of its traffic flow, that if the gold market is demolished, and we can have a roundabout and the Gantaghar, and then have a better view of this area. We're improving the road infrastructure all around it, the traffic flow. This is one option. Another option was discussed, and that to have a different kind of a traffic management mechanism, but you could have other roads connected. Then, of course, another option was prepared. So multiple options on what to do in this area were prepared in terms of the design process. And then eventually, it was after much extensive deliberations and meetings with people, it was decided that we'll adopt a strategy which will be as simple as possible in terms of its implementation. And so this was one of the objectives was to do this. You have phase one, where you have a view of from the Ghantaghar, and this whole area is demolished. And these are part phase two areas. And this is again the initial thought process that if we can clean it up, what would happen. And then the project was after agreeing on a particular strategy in terms of relocation of people. It was then the relocation process was initiated and the demolition of the gold market was initiated. And now this is the demolition process, which took several months to do. And you can now see that after, these are views from the Ghantaghar area, and you can see the beginnings of the beautiful building of the Shah Rukh Alam and cleaning up of this whole area. And this is one series of pictures. And then after completion of phase one, we have a view from the fort to the Ghantaghar. The shrine is visible. And similarly, there is another structure, which is the Damdama of the fort. And now you're beginning to see the development of the roundabout. And in the next few pictures, you'll get to see the Ghantaghar. These are views from the fort. And this is the roundabout now, which is under development of the square. And then the next series of pictures will give you further clarification on how the process was then further taken. Now, this is the view from the Ghantaghar of the square, and in the background, you have the Shah Rukh Alam. This whole area has been cleaned. And it had a series of mosques, and it was the areas right behind here was also another phase, and this area was also to be cleaned up. And slum clearance, remove the residents, relocation of the mosques. And then the next series of pictures is an indication of how the clearing operation took place. The view from the fort, from Ghantaghar roof. And then you have now, this is the phase two, which is this area, which was needed to be removed. 2A, divide this into various phases, 2A, 2B. And there was a structure which I wanted to have removed, and this was a transmission tower, which was marring the view of the whole fort. So and the next process was cleaning up these areas. They were cleaned. Further demolition of the encroachments, provision of road from the roundabout straight into the fort. And then next was this. And then finally, we were heading towards, now these are some of the pictures after clearing up of the overall area. And the next threshold was that this was a view that we had prepared. This is a sketch. And then finally, after completion of various phases, you find that the restoration of the Ghantaghar was undertaken again, and there's an improvement there now. It's a museum, and the square itself is now looking like this. So what you found earlier, there's a complete renovation, restoration that took place, urban renewal, and now you find in the roundabout a mosque, which has got a structure which is coming up. And now this is a day view, and then here is another view of the same location that was encroached on earlier, and it is now cleaned up, and you see a series of parks on one side and another area here, and then this is the Ghantaghar. Now we're sitting on the fort, and we're looking to add towards that overall square. And these are some of the current views, and this is the view of the Ghantaghar at night, and then this is another view of the same location. Then this is another view. And then, of course, this is another view at night of that overall area. There is a clearing up. And as you can see, the roundabout is there with the mosque, and the areas surrounding it are parks and open areas. And this is another view from where you have the view of the overall area. And this is now a picture of the Shah Rukh Alam that you have here. And this is the square in front of it. And here is a Qasim Bagh cricket stadium, which is a part of the fort that you see. Thank you. This was the project that I wanted to discuss and give some feedback on, just to highlight the complexities that are involved in doing urban renewal and urban regeneration. I'm looking towards comments, and then we'll take this thing further.
Thank you so much, Pervez. Before we go to the questions from the panel or from those who are attending, who are in attendance, I just want to ask a few things. Just a few quick questions, if you'd be happy to answer those. One of the things that you mentioned in this one is the removal of encroachments. That's fine. That might be part of an urban renewal program. But we had Arif Hassan Saab about a year ago, and if you remember, there were a lot of removal of encroachments and demolitions in Karachi after the Supreme Court order. And Arif Hassan Saab, he is also a known architect. I'm sure you know of him. He did a webinar. We did a webinar. We did invite him, and one of the things that he said was that it was not just the removal of encroachments, but their livelihoods were connected to those areas. And a lot of those livelihoods were destroyed. There was a whole economy running over there. So yes, you do remove the encroachments, but you also remove the mini earning potential or the livelihoods of those people. Most of them are poor people. So I'm just wondering if this aspect has been taken into account of your like the Multan plan that you are talking about. Has that been taken into account? Second, short questions. One of the things that I just want to understand is, because regeneration plans are about enhancing economic mobility and overall wealth of a city and the economy, so that you can maximize the potential of a city, whatever it can offer in terms of economic growth. So in your plan, how are these aspects related to economy addressed? Thank you.
Two very good questions. In fact, they're excellent questions. Arif Hassan's perspective and point of view, we all respect that very well, and we all agree with it. That whenever you do some sort of a slum clearance, there's economic livelihoods there. Now, in the context of Multan, it was slightly different. What we had here was an unusual situation, that we had a bunch of tanneries, and they were bringing in their leather and hides inside the city and locating it right at a junction of a confluence of about 9 roads, where there were further traders and where there is other trade organizations which were being impacted because of the presence of the tanneries and the hides which were there. So in other words, those people who were in the surrounding areas were getting a negative impact of the presence of a tannery or a hide market. And if you've ever been in and around a hide market, it smells. So there is a lot of odor there. And a lot of trade organizations, one of the reasons why this was successful was because the trade organizations also came on board and they said, well, yes, if this gold market, leather market area is removed, then their businesses will improve. In fact, there were a lot of discussions and arguments between the stakeholders, between those people who had the leather market there as compared to the people who were in and around surrounding area. So there is a general improvement of the economic activity. And in the presence of more traffic coming in, there will be additional people coming into the market. So that was one. Now, the second question, I think, was regarding the economic mobility, is basically, if you're looking at the people who were the residents of the gold market, they had to be relocated somewhere else. And And that was done under a different charter altogether. And their compensation plans, how they were on the area that they had, how long they had lived there. There was an overall package which was worked out in terms of the length of tenure that they were existing on that particular area. And then there was a due compensation worked out for them. Perhaps this response to some of the questions.
Thank you, Pervez. Let's go to the floor. Dr. Nadeem Haq, please go ahead.
Okay, PQ, thank you very much for a very good presentation. I think it's a very important subject that we need to think about. हमारे यहाँ यही होता है कि हम सोचते हैं कि जी बस जितना फैलाओ उतना अच्छा है. PQ, what I'd like to really hear from you, okay, how is it कि, I mean, cities like London, for example, New York, मैंने अपनी जिंदगी में देखा है न्यूयॉर्क में इतनी जेंट्रिफिकेशन हुई है विद इन अ मैटर ऑफ इयर्स, छोटे छोटे टाइम में, मतलब 5-10 साल में पूरा ब्रुकलिन जेंट्रिफाई हो गया और मतलब रिजुविनेट हो गया. इसी तरह आप चले जाए लंदन में, मतलब इस्लिंगटन was gentrified virtually in 5-10 years and the government didn't spend any money. It just happened, by the change of rules. तो इसके ऊपर जरा थोड़ा सा हमें डिस्क्राइब कर दो कि क्या होता है ये, and why can't we do that? Why can't we just simply change the rules and let people do their own? Because we think too much कि government आके करेगी. For example, case in point, कि अगर मैं देखूं main market Gulberg या even Liberty Gulberg, I think they're really up for rejuvenation. या ले ले Hall Road Lahore या Brandreth Road, they're really up for rejuvenation. Why can't we do that? Thank you.
अच्छा, उसमें and that's a very good question, Nadeem. But the issue is basically when you do some regeneration renewal, you need to take the public, you need the stakeholders who are there, they need to agree to it. And they all need to agree somewhere along the line that it is going to be beneficial for them. If they somehow or the other feel that it is not really going to make a difference, and it's
of course, it has to be PQ. It has to be a win-win situation. Why is it the Goras can do it, we can't? Is there a genetic problem?
No, not genetic. It's just basically हमारे एक threshold of awareness कम है. Number two, हमारी local governance जो है, it's not that institutionalized so far. हमारी local body election होते वैसे नहीं होते. Trade organizations आजकल जो भी कर रही हैं, I mean, they're doing it in specific markets. For example, Azam Cloth Market in Lahore, and some people around the Gulberg area that you recently identified are wanting to now get together. There's a trade organization which basically calls in the municipal corporation to make sure that all the heaps of garbage which are there are cleaned up. But it needs more. And to do something like this, it needs a lot of commitment, it needs a lot of attention, and they also need a lot of technical backup on this, which a lot of these areas don't have.
Let's go to Amir Zafar Durrani.
I hope you can hear me. This is Amir here. Basically, can I be heard? Can you hear me right now?
Ji, bilkul ji.
So I think that I'm very happy about the detail you gave on the tanning and everything and leather thing going on at the place that you rejuvenated. I think I want to give you two examples, and then maybe you would comment on what I call the layering of this. This aspect that most of our upstart, young, socialist-minded people think of encroachments. And, I was exactly the same back in like 1995 when I started working with the World Bank, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to go out and be the harbinger of all that's right for humanity. But then when you actually start studying encroachment, especially in urban areas, you find layers and layers of involvement there. And the involvement, therefore, goes back to the level which I think is Nadeem's question as to why we need government intervention in countries like Pakistan, is that behind that layer, even those people who do business or even live there have protectors behind them, be they drug pushers or peddlers, as in the case of Chicago, be they actually the human rights and, abused blacks in the case of New York after the Turnpike, be they, London has a plethora of examples. So in Pakistan, you will always find that there's not a clear relationship in urban rejuvenation between actually the settlers, so-called, whether they be commercial settlers or actually social settlers, meaning they live there. And actually there is a whole layer. So my question to you is, when you did this, as you said rightly, you went to the Trade Association, how would you, for example, I'll give you a particular example. Why has Tollington failed? Why is, for example, Pindi, Central Pindi, Sadar, that area, why have we not been able to rejuvenate some of the highest density areas? And I don't even want to go to Old Lahore. So what is really behind that? Is that just a governance failure? Or, I mean, because remember, most of the times this desire for rejuvenation comes from within the community. And like, you know, Chicago ki jo rejuvenation maine apne saath dekhi hai, Pittsburgh mein certain areas were redone. So what is it that's keeping us from doing that other than, and Nadeem calls them gentrification programs. I think that's not a very great title, sir, because the gentrification nahi hame chahiye, hame areas revival chahiye. Sorry, it's a very long-winded way of asking a question, but you really sparked a lot of debate in my mind.
Well, it's a good question, Ahmed. The issue really is, I really go back to the people themselves. I think over a period of time, what has happened is that हमारे जो concept of community है at one level and environment है, कि जो physical environment है, how we can improve that, you'll find gullies. You go into a street and the gully, that street is in a terrible situation, but as soon as you enter a house, it's very, very clean. The concept of your neighbor and cleanliness within the area is somehow or the other alien. I know that's a poor choice of word, but the collective community well-being concept wo bada kamzor hai. And you find this everywhere. You find that in slums, you find that in squatter settlements, you find that, you know, the individual house will be sparkling clean, maybe a mud house, it can be a little shanty, but as soon as you step out of it, you'll find storm drainage, there's no collection going on, people throw things on the floor, on the ground, dusty, and all kinds of things. Now, the similar things happens in many of the urban areas. Is that it's the collective, the whole concept that, you know, we need to pick up garbage and deposit it in a particular location, that awareness, that public the issue of, you know, we have neighbors and we need to look after their interests as well is somehow lacking. That's one. Number two, there are very few community organizations which are actually focusing on this. There are some excellent examples of where they have focused, they have really achieved tremendous ground. For example, in the walled city of Lahore, when they were doing the first trail, which was being funded by the World Bank, it was one of the most difficult areas that they had selected in the walled city to undertake. Very complex from Delegate onwards onto, I don't know how familiar you are with these areas, but it was a very complicated area and it took them years. But once one or two neighborhood or gullies were improved, then everybody else started getting on board. And these are examples that you create in isolated cases when other people start following. I can give you another example of a project that we did in Peshawar, where we did the beautification plan for the city. On one canal, there were close to 1,000 shops which were defecating inside the canal. In other words, you have a road on both sides, and the canal was covered with shops. And these were primarily refugees, and they had just completely destroyed one of that particular canal. And so the intention was to do a clearing up operation. And we managed to achieve that without a single shot being fired, you know, with about 900 people with guns and all that. It took a lot of doing, but managed to clean up that area because there was a collective push, there's a political wish to have this area cleaned up. And the commissioner, the administration, the municipal corporation, they're all involved. The same thing is applicable in many of these areas, like Multan is again a case in point, where you have all the stakeholders they all got together and they all agreed that this is going to be a good thing for everybody. It's got to be a win-win situation.
Thank you, Pervez Saab. Amir, I hope that answers the question. We'll go to Babar Saab next. Please, Babar, unmute your mic.
Hello, Babar Mumtaz. How are you? I thought you were not going to join in.
I canceled some other things in order to be here, and I'm very glad that I did.
Thank you.
A couple of things, Pervez. First of all, I was absolutely amazed at what you said was the brief that had been given to you. And indeed, in your opening remarks, it was primarily a request for you to clean up the area. It was to open up some views. And in that briefing, at least at that aspect of it, you hardly mentioned people. Now, and this was a point that has been raised later by Nadeem Saab, that what happened to people, and indeed the host also referred to R.F. Hassan's writings, that what happens to the people. And I think some of the subsequent discussions that we've been having just now also highlight this absolute disconnect between government and governed. The people are there as if they were there at a sufferance. There is no partnership. There is no attempt to incorporate them. So it is not surprising that once you are outside your front door, or perhaps your gate, if you're rich enough to have a gate, that is not your territory, that is not your concern. And ironically, it's the other way around as well. So I'm saying that this is not something that we can tackle on a city basis. By that, I mean a sort of city by city. It's a sort of institutional problem that we face. But let me add a third aspect, which I think is far more important and far more concerning to me, is the professional failure. Nadeem Saab and also Amir Saab were talking about examples in other cities, in other countries. When was the last time anybody saw proposals by urban planners or even by architects talking about what our cities could look like, talking about how they could do that? Where is the basis for ideas of regeneration? We seem to be isolated. At best, we operate once we have an assignment. Where is the thought process? We need, as a profession, as urban planners, to put forth and put out into the public the visions of what is possible. We cannot expect to be led by bureaucrats and by politicians. So I see that in this process, it is the professional failure that is amongst the sort of basis for why we do not have good working cities.
Babar, I think the most relevant thing that I would like to respond is regarding the people. Now, let me reassure you, I talked about the stakeholders, and of course, I talked about the residents and the commercial, and I put that into a large group. Now, there were huge, I mean, the whole issue was that you're interacting with people, and there were people who were agreeing with you, and there are people who were being actually displaced. And those people who are going to be displaced are obviously going to be raising a multiple set of issues that, they've been living there for X number of years. And we needed to take everybody on board. Otherwise, this thing is not possible. And so that is in any urban renewable program. The people, that's the stakeholder. That's the key element of the equation. And how that was dealt with is another matter, but it involved about dozens and dozens of meetings, interacting with them. There was a whole leather market association where they had to be relocated to. So it was a fairly complex set of interactive discussions that took place before one could even start doing any of this work.
Gee, I mean, I'm intrigued by Babar Mumtaz Saab bhi aa gaye. Thank you very much. And PQ, I'd like to ask both of you this question: कि पाकिस्तान में इतने मास्टर प्लान्स बनते हैं, वो मास्टर प्लान सारे होते हैं तकरीबन कि हमने फैलाव और बढ़ाना है, और हमारे यहाँ लॉबी अर्बन रिन्यूअल की बिल्कुल भी नहीं है. वी डोंट सीम टू थिंक ऑफ अर्बन रिन्यूअल एट ऑल. एंड PQ keeps saying a relocation. PQ, I don't see why there should be a relocation. For example, why can't Samnabad be relocated? Why, I mean, renewed? I think it's an urban area which is dying to be renewed. Even Islamabad mein F6 is an area that needs to be renewed. ठीक है, बड़े rich घर है ये वो, but for God's sakes, the people are coming in from Bahria into Lahore, into Islamabad. I've got people here in PID जो 2-2 घंटे drive करके आते हैं, but yet urban renewal is spurned on by the builders themselves and the architects. I think I'm going to put the blame on both you and Babar Saab. कि आप लोग, why are you guys not a lobby for urban renewal? Why is it you guys are the seat? हमें तो खैर seat पे आने नहीं देते, हमें तो they don't let us come on the seat for urban development. मैंने कोशिश भी की है, but they don't allow PID in. They think economists can't contribute. But the builders and the architects and the town planners are very much there. But I feel that the builders and town planners, architects are also against urban renewal now. Why is that? Please explain that to me.
Nadeem, first, I think you're raising 4 or 5 different issues. You're raising issue number 1 is related to a master plan. Okay, that's one. Second issue that you're raising is urban renewal. Okay. Third one, you're accusing the architects and then the planners for not. And then fourth, that why is urban renewal really not taking place? Now, there are multiple questions and they have different responses. Starting from the master plan, now in the master planning process, there is very little effort. If you look at the Lahore master plan or many of the other master plans, there is usually a chapter which is called slum clearance in a major book. And it really doesn't focus on the mechanisms or methodologies involved in urban renewal. Invariably, that is the case. Secondly, the urban renewal process in the context जहाँ हम लोग हैं, in the context of Lahore or in Pakistan, it is a natural thing that takes place. Now, I'm going to give you an example of Gulberg industrial area. And I'm also going to give you an example of the Lahore ka industrial area, which was the Kot Lakhpat industrial area. Over a period of time, you had industries located here. Now the industries are relocating and they're going outside the city or somewhere else. And these are being taken up with residential commercial developments. And this is a phase that takes place in most cities anyway. So there is a market pressure on the redevelopment and renewal which is going on. And here the obstruction comes in from the development authority, where they have zoned the city into industrial area and they will not allow anything else to come up there. वो एक और इशू है. बाकी आप बता रहे हैं कि why architects and planners are not playing a role. Well, it's like saying, why are not economists playing a role? Why is public at large not playing a role? It's the whole community has to take up this thing about urban renewal. After you're a citizen of the city, why not economists? Why is it only architects and planners which have to do this? So it's a whole community of people that really need to play this role. Again.
Dr. Nadeem, before we again, if you have any questions, let Syed Hassan first ask the question, then we'll come back to you.
I have one comment and one question. So first of all, echoing on some of the previous questions related to relocation, dislocation, or the issues around the livelihood of the displaced people, I have a suggestion that probably projects like these can have some sort of a mechanism where they do some sort of a systematic mapping of the beneficiaries and losers pre and post project. So maybe we can then probably answer these questions more comfortably later on. And then my question from Pervez Saab is that this is a fantastic project, but this must have involved a lot of public and private stakeholders. So I'm particularly concerned about the public sector stakeholders like the Water and Sanitation Agency or the Multan Development Authority or maybe the electricity MEPCO or whatever. So how did the project team was able to achieve coordination with all of these agencies? Because in such sort of projects, probably achieving coordination among various agencies could be a very big challenge.
That's a very relevant question. One of the huge challenges was to get everybody together and on board, and particularly with the stakeholders, and there are conflicting interest groups, as obviously on a scale like this. And it is just, we had a good team of people at that time, and they were very interactive. And of course, there was the pressure from the government as well in terms of trying to clean up Multan. At the time when this was implemented, Yusuf Raza Gilani was the prime minister, and he was very keen to have his city, the qualitative standards of that city being improved. So there was a political thrust as well. And it came in different forms in terms of not only pressure, but also in form of resources. So there was the political will to do something like this. And then combined with this was the people themselves who were there, and they managed to achieve this in a matter of about 4 years, 3-4 years, which is an extraordinary development on its own. But it's the institutions. When you go to any other area, you always need to have the political will to sort this out. You need to have the institutions work together in form of coordinated efforts, and all that is not there.
Just a brief comment on the process of regeneration in most of European and perhaps less so American, but certainly European cities, is that areas decline and then they get subdivided and used for lower income and people who cannot afford to be anywhere else. And that includes artists and musicians and people of that kind. They go there, which then they attract things like restaurants, cafeterias, and so on. And that area then becomes attractive, and then developers move in and start upgrading. In our cities, I think as Nadeem Saab has often pointed out, we have a kind of escape valve. And that escape valve is that when areas go down or when areas become ripe for redevelopment, instead we open up new areas outside the city. So instead of that pressure building up and focusing on areas and upgrading them, we move out and we merely spread the city wider and wider, creating more problems for ourselves. So I think that process, again, needs to be better understood and articulated. But I still go back to the point I was making, that it is up to us as professionals, and I happen to be an urban planner, an architect, and an economist, so I can see the linkages and I think where Nadeem Saab is coming from, that we need to demonstrate, and we need to demonstrate this out of a professional interest and not purely as on the basis of commissions. Until we can express and show the way, it'll be very difficult to ask people or get people to agree to follow.
I think that's a very good comment, Babar. But just for everybody's this thing, most of the work that was done by me in Multan was pro bono. And it took many years to do all this work. And eventually the project was also selected for the Aga Khan Award. It was nominated for its greater impact in terms of the physical environment. And, there are very few people who are actually going to start working and putting in their time free of cost to try to get something sorted out, and particularly a mess of the nature that we had in Multan at that time. But it has turned out to be, I look back and reflect, and find that there is a certain amount of ownership that has been taken over. Although one initiated the whole process, but the municipal corporation has taken over the whole thing. The Multan Development Authority owns it. The archaeology department looks at the building of the Ghanta Ghar, and they have taken ownership. The ownership is now with the Awqaf department in terms of the Qila itself, the fort, and they have started working on its refurbishment as well. So it's an interesting ownership concept now, and the Multanis are generally very proud of that particular, and they take very great amount of pride in some of the development that they've had.
Ji, thank you. We had Amir Zafar Durrani raise his hand. So Amir, if you can go ahead, and then I think Dr. Nadeem had also raised his hand, but I couldn't see it. So Dr. Nadeem, if you want to ask any question, then Amir Zafar Durrani, and then Sabir Hussain.
So, my mind's still, in the gutters vis-a-vis one question. Everyone start to posit why rejuvenation is not happening. And you gave the best answer about the community not surviving anymore in Pakistan. But I'm still thinking, what is that impetus? Because we're a nation of subsidies anyways. Dr. Saab is an expert on that subject. But essentially, I think that if it be so that all we do is government is great at giving incentives and subsidies, my first question to you, what will incentivize us to really, in Nadim's word, gentrify, let's say, the old Sadar or Hathi Chowk in Pindi? The second question I have for you is, what is the purpose of regeneration? Is it social? Is it social impact? Is it social economic? Is it purely financial? And within that question, I have a third one, which I'll leave for the next time we talk. Thank you.
नहीं आमिर आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है. You know, at the end of the day, what is it that really, what are the real, we need to have clear-cut objectives. Okay, what is it that we really want to do? And sometimes they are so gray that there's a lack of clarity कि भी करना क्या है. And there is no clear-cut vision on what you want to do. And therefore, many of these areas are what they are. And unless and until there is a clear-cut vision, clarity of thought, the process, and the objectives, then it's very difficult to move towards urban renewal. It's a tough assignment. It's a very complex one. It involves people. It involves the livelihood. It involves the economic development, and it also involves the aesthetics of that area, the cleanliness, the maintenance and upkeep, and sustainability, a host of issues. So I feel that unless and until that there is a certain threshold of awareness of community participation, community living, we will still be where we are, unfortunately. I'd like to just make the last comment. Thank you for inviting me. The purpose of today's discussion really was that PIDE is on a good track of trying to solicit proposals from various organizations and individuals on issues related to urban renewal and urban regeneration. And what we need to do is to perhaps be clearer in what the objectives are going to be, so that the people who are wanting to participate and give proposals in their own specific areas are also clear on what they should be and what the deliverables are going to be. So today's discussion was really a food for thought for reviewing our request for proposals. Okay, perhaps we need to not make them as complex and as complicated, and maybe just have limited objectives in those proposals, because the funding is tight and at the same time the time frame is tight. So perhaps that review needs to take place.
Thank you so much, Pervez Saab, for being with us in this important webinar. This is an important topic, and this was a very nice talk that you gave, and all your answers to the question. I'm sure we'll have more webinars on this very important subject in the future, and we'll be inviting you again. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you all to all the participants. Until next time, Allah Hafiz.